The room was full of doctors, cardiologists, surgeons, specialists flown in from 3 different countries, all of them guests at the most powerful Mafia wedding the city had ever seen. And when Doyen Cassius Vael, the man who owned judges, silenced journalists, and made generals nervous, collapsed face-first onto the marble floor of his own banquet hall, not one of them moved. Not because they didn't know what to do, because they knew exactly who he was. His wife, Seraphine, stood frozen at the head table, diamonds at her throat, champagne still in her hand, watching her husband's body convulse on the floor. She looked at the doctors around the room. They looked back at her. A silent agreement passed between them all. Let him go. Then a chair scraped. One person stood up. Dr. Adaeze Orim, the only black woman in the room, the only person Seraphine had spent 6 months trying to have fired, discredited, and destroyed, walked through the crowd, dropped to her knees beside the most dangerous man alive, and started saving his life. The room held its breath. Seraphine's champagne glass shattered on the floor. And nothing would ever be the same again. Dr. Adaeze Orim had received 3 termination notices in 4 months. Not warnings. Not performance reviews. Termination notices, each one blocked on technicalities so thin they were almost insulting. 6 weeks bought here. A missing signature there. 6 weeks of showing up to Vail Memorial Hospital knowing the woman whose name was on the building wanted her gone. She hadn't been invited to the wedding. She'd been summoned. Mandatory attendance. Non-negotiable. Signed by Chief Administrator Prentice Oko, the man who smiled at her in hallways and voted against her in closed rooms. She ironed her dress and went anyway. Because 14 of her patients were alive because of Vail Foundation funding. And she had learned long ago that you didn't win wars by staying home. The estate sat on the northern edge of the city like a wound that refused to close. The banquet hall alone was larger than the pediatric ward she'd fought 3 years to keep open. Men who ordered violence ate with silver forks beneath chandeliers that cost more than her medical school debt. She found table 14, furthest from everything, and sat down. That was when she saw Seraphine Vael looking at her. Not glancing. Looking. The particular stillness of a woman who had already decided something and was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. Diamonds at her throat. Champagne in her hand. Every gesture architectural. Designed, not born. Adaeze looked away. That was her first mistake. Because she missed the moment Seraphine leaned toward her husband and said something behind her hand. Missed Cassius Vael's eyes cutting across the room to where she sat. Missed the expression on his face. Not the cold authority she'd expected. Something closer to recognition. Then his body locked. A stumble first. One hand reaching for a chair. Then his head dropped. Then Cassius Vael, the most feared man in 4 provinces, went down hard on the marble floor, and the sound of it silenced everything. 3 full seconds. Nobody moved. Adaeze was already counting. She looked around, at the cardiologists, the surgeons, the specialists flown in from 3 countries, and watched them all make the same calculation and arrive at the same answer. Not tonight. Seraphine's voice broke the silence. Someone call an ambulance. Rehearsed. Not accompanied by anyone dropping to their knees. Adaeze pushed her chair back. The scrape of it on marble was the loudest thing in the room. She walked through the frozen crowd, not ran, walked, dropped to her knees beside him, and read his body in seconds. Ventricular tachycardia. He needs cardioversion. Now. Does anyone have an AED? Her voice didn't shake. Lobby. 90 seconds or he dies. Nobody moved. She looked directly at the surgeon across the room. Ocean. Get it. He went. Seraphine stepped forward until her gown brushed Adaeze's shoulder. Her voice dropped to something only Adaeze could hear. If he dies under your hands, I will make sure everyone remembers you were the one touching him. Adaeze kept her fingers on his wrist and said very quietly, "Then pray I'm better at my job than you are at yours." The AED arrived. She used it. Cassius Vael's heart lurched back into rhythm. The room exhaled. Adaeze sat back on her heels, hands trembling, not from fear, from adrenaline with nowhere left to go, and understood from the look on Seraphine's face that saving him was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. The ambulance took 11 minutes. Adaeze counted every one, 2 fingers on his wrist, listening to his pulse the way you listen to a building that might collapse. Present. Irregular. Stubborn. Like the man himself. When the paramedics loaded him, the room reorganized. Not to help. To position. Conversations restarted in urgent clusters. Phones appeared. Prentice Oko, who hadn't moved during the entire episode, was now somehow at the center of everything, smile restored, composure immaculate. Seraphine was gone. That was more alarming than anything else. A man she didn't recognize, late 40s, lean, trained still, expensive suit, visible earpiece, appeared beside her. Mrs. Vael requests you ride to the hospital with Mr. Vael. And if I decline? She anticipated that. She asked me to tell you your hospital parking permit expires at midnight. The gate system has already been updated. Not your life. Not your career. Your parking permit. The message underneath it was precise. I control things you haven't thought to worry about yet. Adaeze picked up her bag. Lead the way. 40 minutes in a black SUV, following the ambulance through streets that had been cleared before Cassius even hit the floor. She used the time to think. The clinical picture first. Ventricular tachycardia in a man his age suggested years of underlying structural heart disease. Managed privately, off record. The episode tonight was not a first. The way his body had moved as he fell, almost practiced, told her he'd felt this coming and had learned what it meant. He'd known. That was what she'd seen across the room. Not guilt. Recognition. He'd found her in the crowd and then gone down. The other picture was harder. Seraphine had not screamed. Not moved. Not touched him. Had issued one calm, technically correct, practically useless instruction and waited to see which way it landed. That was not grief. That was calculation. At the hospital, a nurse stopped her outside the cardiac ICU. Dr. Fenwick will be taking over Mr. Vail's case. Fenwick. 63, cautious to the point of paralysis, entirely owned by the Vail Foundation. He had seconded her second termination notice. I stabilized him at the scene. I need to brief. Dr. Fenwick has been fully briefed. By whom? Please wait in the family lounge, Dr. Orim. The family lounge. Like a worried relative. Managed and contained before she could become inconvenient. She went. Because a scene was exactly what someone was hoping for. She was still there when Seraphine walked in. She had changed clothes, simpler, darker, still expensive. The diamonds gone. A woman with a wardrobe for every phase of a night she had planned. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Seraphine said, "He's stable." "I know. I stabilized him." Something moved behind Seraphine's eyes. Gone before it could be named. "I've spent 6 months trying to remove you from this hospital," Seraphine said. Not an apology. A statement preceding something worse. "I still have my reasons. Tonight changes nothing between us." She paused. "I want you to understand that before my husband wakes up." Before. Not if. Delivered not as relief, as a deadline. "What happens when he wakes up?" Adaeze asked. Seraphine stood. Smoothed her jacket. Almost smiled. "That depends entirely on what he remembers." She left. Adaeze sat in the humming silence and understood, with cold, clarifying certainty, that she hadn't saved Cassius Vael from dying. She'd saved him from something Seraphine had been waiting a very long time to finish. And now she was in the middle of it. Cassius Vael woke at 4:17 a.m. Adaeze heard it from the family lounge. Rapid footsteps, clipped voices, the specific frequency of people being summoned rather than responding. One dominant voice settling into command within minutes of consciousness. 12 minutes later, a nurse opened her door. Mr. Vael is asking for you. He used your full name. Asked how long you'd been waiting. He knew she was here. He'd made it the first information he received. That was not accident. He was sitting up when she entered, bed inclined 45 degrees, shoulders set, hands resting deliberately on the blanket. Every inch of him broadcasting. I am not diminished by this. But his color was wrong. And his left hand was doing the involuntary curl she'd seen before he fell. He was performing recovery he hadn't yet achieved. They tell me you were the one, he said. Yes. How long before anyone else moved? That's a question for them. He studied her with the directness of someone who had spent decades reading people accurately and quickly. You're not afraid of me. You're my patient. Fear isn't useful. Most people find it very useful. I'm not most people. Something crossed his face, respect filtered through pain and calculation. No, he said quietly. You're not. A pause. Then, my wife was here. What did she say? That tonight changes nothing between us. The monitor beeped twice into the silence that followed. She's tried to have you fired, he said. 3 times. I know about all 3. No flinch. No performance of surprise. The room shifted. You knew, Adaeze said. Yes. And didn't stop it. No. She sat with that. The clinical detachment she'd been using as armor developed its first crack. Why are you telling me this? Because you saved my life and you deserve truth instead of more performance. She studied him. The exhaustion underneath the discipline, the weight of something carried long enough to change the shape of a person. What do you want, Mr. Vael? I want to know why you did it. Every person in that room had a reason not to. You had more reason than any of them. I had reasons, she said. They weren't reasons not to. You tried to end my career 3 times. Your foundation gutted my pediatric ward. Your name is on a building your wife uses as a weapon. She held his gaze. None of that changes what I am. You were dying. That was the only fact that mattered. Something moved through his expression. Too complex for a single word. Living at the intersection of respect and shame and a grief older than tonight. Dr. Orim, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. The specific alertness of a door that cannot be unopened. I'm listening, she said. He opened his mouth. The door swung open. Seraphine. Taking in the scene, Adaeze in the chair, Cassius upright, a conversation mid-sentence, in 1 second. Her composure returning like a mask snapping back. You should be resting, Cassius. I'm talking. Dr. Fenwick says. I know what Fenwick says. His voice dropped. Which was worse than rising. I asked to speak with Dr. Orim. Alone. Seraphine's eyes moved to Adaeze. 3 full seconds. Long enough to be a message. Of course. She left the door open. Cassius looked at it. Then at Adaeze, the exhaustion fully visible now, the weight of 14 months pressing through everything he'd been holding up. Come back tomorrow. 6 a.m. Before rounds. I'm not assigned to your case. You are now. Your wife will. My wife does not make medical decisions. Adaeze stood. Looked at him one last time. The man on the monitors, the name on the building, the signature on the notices, and couldn't reconcile any of it with the person in front of her. Not yet. 6 a.m., she said. In the corridor, Seraphine stood exactly where she'd said she'd be. Calculated distance. Full sight line. She said nothing as Adaeze passed. But at the end of the corridor, her voice came, quiet, level, carrying just far enough. He has a habit of trusting the wrong people, Dr. Orim. I'd hate for you to become another one of his regrets. Adaeze walked through the door without turning. Outside, the sky was considering dawn without committing to it. She stood in the cold and understood. Seraphine had been listening from the corridor. The open door wasn't carelessness. It was a warning. She came back at 6. Cassius was already awake. Already waiting. The room felt different in the early morning light. Smaller, more honest, stripped of the nighttime performance. He handed her a folder before she could sit down. No greeting. No preamble. Just the folder, thick, dog-eared, held together by a rubber band that had been replaced so many times the original color was unguessable. "Don't react," he said. "Just read." She opened it. The first page was a patient file. Vail Memorial Hospital letterhead. Her name at the top as attending physician. For a patient she had never treated. She turned the page. Lab results. Fabricated. She could see the inconsistencies immediately. The kind of errors that happened when someone who understood medicine well enough to be dangerous but not well enough to be careful constructed something false. Medication records. A signed discharge summary. Her signature. Forged. But good enough. She turned another page and stopped breathing. A formal complaint. Dated 8 weeks ago. Patient negligence leading to permanent injury. Her name. Her department. Her supposed treatment decisions. Each one a deliberate, clinical, catastrophic choice that no doctor with her training would ever make. "This file," she said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were not. "This is what the third termination notice was built on." "Yes," Cassius said. "Who built it?" He looked at her with the expression of a man choosing between two unbearable answers. "Cassius." She put the file down. "Who built it?" The monitor beeped 4 times into the silence. "I found it 3 weeks ago," he said. "I didn't build it. But I know who did. And I know why." He exhaled, a slow, damaged sound. "That file was designed to remove you permanently before you found something you weren't supposed to find." Her blood went cold. "What did I find?" "You haven't found it yet," he said. "But you're close. Close enough that someone got scared." He looked toward the open door. "Close enough that someone decided a forged file was safer than letting you keep asking questions." "What questions?" "I haven't been." "Your pediatric ward funding appeal," he said quietly. "You submitted financial discrepancy reports to the board. 6 months ago. You flagged 3 irregular transfers." She remembered. She'd flagged them as a footnote, accounting anomalies, she'd assumed, the kind of bureaucratic noise that accumulated in large institutions. "Those weren't anomalies," Cassius said. "Then what were they?" The door swung open. Dr. Fenwick stood in the frame, chart in hand, eyes moving between them with the practiced alarm of a man who had been sent to interrupt and was pretending he hadn't. "Mr. Vael. Time for morning OBS." Cassius held Adeeze's gaze for 1 long second. "Come back tonight," he said. "Use the service entrance." Then he lay back against the pillow and became a patient again. And Adeeze walked out carrying a forged file with her name on it, knowing that somewhere in this hospital, someone was already watching her leave. She didn't go to the service entrance. Not because she was afraid. Because she spent the day doing something more dangerous than showing up. She went back to those 6-month-old financial discrepancy reports and she read them again. Properly this time. Not as footnotes. As evidence. 3 irregular transfers. Different amounts. Different dates. Same destination account, routed through a shell company registered in a name she didn't recognize, dissolved 4 months after the last transfer, leaving nothing behind except a number and a silence that had been very carefully shaped to look like nothing. She cross-referenced the transfer dates against the hospital's departmental records. Her hands stopped moving. Every transfer had occurred within 72 hours of a patient death. Not random patients. Terminal cases. End stage. Expected. Documented. Deaths that generated insurance payouts. Deaths that nobody questioned because the paperwork was clean and the doctors signing off were names she recognized. Fenwick. Ocean. 2 others. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the one person she trusted inside the hospital. Nuri Adeyemi, a records administrator who had survived 4 restructurings by being indispensable and invisible in equal measure. "I need access to closed patient files," she said. "Cardiac ward. Last 2 years. Silence on the line. Nuri. Adaeze." His voice was low. "Wrong. I can't or won't." "Someone pulled those files this morning. All of them. Flagged as under legal review." A pause that lasted too long. "They were fine yesterday. I checked them yesterday." She felt the walls of the situation move inward. Someone knew she was looking. She grabbed her bag and took the stairs. Not the elevator, not today. And she was 3 floors down when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "Stop now and we forget the file exists. Keep going and it gets submitted tonight." She stared at the message. The service entrance was at the back of the building. A loading dock, poorly lit, smelling of industrial detergent and cold air. She arrived at 9 p.m. and stood in the shadow of a doorway and waited. A figure appeared. Not Cassius. A woman. Young, sharp-eyed. Moving with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned to be somewhere without appearing to arrive. "Dr. Orim." Not a question. "He sent me. My name is Tavita. I work for Mr. Vael, not for his wife." The distinction landed like a stone in still water. "He can't come to you tonight," Tavita said. Fenwick sedated him. "Higher than prescribed. We think." She stopped. Looked behind her. Started again. "We think it wasn't accidental." Adaeze felt something cold move through her. "Someone sedated him to keep him from talking to me." "Yes." "Inside this hospital." "Yes." She looked at Tavita. At the dark corridor behind her. At the choice that was not a choice. Bad on one side, worse on the other. "Show me," she said. They went in. She kept walking. The basement of Vail Memorial Hospital was not on any map she had ever seen. Tavita led her through a service corridor that branched left where every blueprint said it ended. A deliberate architectural lie, the kind that required planning permission to hide and money to maintain. The walls changed from painted concrete to bare stone. The lighting changed from fluorescent to a single strip of amber that hummed at a frequency that made Adaeze's back teeth ache. "How long has this existed?" Adaeze asked. "Longer than you've worked here," Tavita said. They stopped at a door. Not a medical door, no keypad, no access card reader. A physical lock. The kind that communicated very clearly that whatever was behind it was not meant to be found by accident. Tavita produced a key. "Mr. Vael gave you this?" Adaeze asked. "He had it sent to me 3 days ago. Before the gala." Tavita looked at her steadily. He knew something was going to happen that night. He was prepared. He was prepared to collapse. He was prepared for whatever his wife had planned. The door opened. The room beyond was cold and smelled of old paper and something chemical underneath it. Sharp, medicinal, the ghost of procedures rather than the procedures themselves. Metal shelving units lined 3 walls, stacked with filing boxes, each one labeled in a handwriting that was small and precise and consistent across years. Adaeze moved to the nearest shelf. The labels were dates. Going back 11 years. She pulled a box. Inside, patient files. Physical copies, pre-digital, the kind of records that existed before everything went into the system. She scanned the first file. A patient name she didn't recognize. Cardiac case. Deceased. She checked the date against her mental map of the financial transfers. 71 hours. She pulled another box. Another file. Another death. Another transfer window. Her legs felt uncertain. "This is an 11-year record," she said. "Yes," Tavita said. "Of what?" "Mr. Vael calls it the inventory." Tavita's voice was careful. Stripped of inflection. Patients admitted through the private cardiac ward. Patients who had no family. No advocates. Patients whose deaths would generate large insurance payouts and whose absence would generate no questions. Adaeze turned slowly. He calls it the inventory. He discovered it 14 months ago. He's been building a case. Against whom? Tavita looked at her for a long moment. Dr. Orim, who do you think ran this hospital before Cassius Vael married into it? The answer arrived before the question finished. Seraphine. Not a wife who had married into power. An architect who had built it. Quietly. Patiently. Over 11 years. Inside the walls of a hospital that bore her husband's name while her hands moved underneath it. Adaeze looked at the shelves. At 11 years of boxes. At the inventory of the dead. He married her not knowing, she said. He married her not knowing, Tavita confirmed. And when he found out, she stopped. A sound from the corridor above. Footsteps. More than one person. Tavita killed the light. In the sudden darkness, Adaeze stood perfectly still, her hand pressed flat against 11 years of evidence, listening to the footsteps slow directly above their heads. Then stop. 3 minutes. That was how long the footsteps stayed directly overhead, long enough to be deliberate, short enough to be deniable. Adaeze counted each second in the dark, her back against the shelving unit, 11 years of evidence pressing cold through her jacket. Tavita was a silhouette. Perfectly still. Not even breathing loudly. Then the footsteps moved. Not away, sideways. Tracing the perimeter of the room above them. Methodical. The specific pattern of someone who knew a space existed below and was calculating the entry points. Adaeze leaned close to Tavita's ear. Is there another way out? Yes. The word was barely air. Behind the last shelf. Maintenance hatch. Comes up in the car park. How far? 20 seconds if we don't make noise. Above them, the footsteps stopped again. Adaeze made the decision. She touched Tavita's arm. Go. And they moved through the dark with the careful speed of people who understood that a sound was the same as a confession. Shelving unit. Second unit. Third. The hatch was exactly where Tavita said. A metal panel low, the kind you went through on hands and knees. Tavita went first. Adaeze went through with a box tucked under her arm. She hadn't planned to take it. Her hand had simply closed around it in the dark. Muscle memory. The instinct of someone who had learned that evidence left behind became evidence used against you. The hatch sealed behind them. The car park was empty and mercilessly bright after the basement dark. They moved fast, not running, moving, to Tavita's car, a grey sedan so aggressively unremarkable it was practically invisible. Inside, Tavita gripped the wheel without starting the engine. They found it, she said. They found the room. Not necessarily. They found the floor above it. That's the same thing. By morning that room is empty. She turned to Adaeze. Everything Cassius built over 14 months, gone. Adaeze looked at the box on her lap. Not everything, she said. Tavita stared at it. One box. One box with 11 files. 11 deaths. 11 transfer windows. Adaeze met her eyes. 11 is enough if we know where to take it. And Cassius. Tavita's voice cracked slightly on his name, the first fracture in her composure, small but total. He's sedated. Fenwick controls his medication. If Seraphine decides tonight that he's more useful unconscious than... Drive, Adaeze said. Where? The hospital. Front entrance. Not the service door. Adaeze was already pulling out her phone. If someone is watching the basement, they're watching the back. We go through the front like we have every right to be there. Because we do. Tavita started the engine. Adaeze dialed. It rang 4 times before a voice answered. Rough, alert. Wrong for 11 p.m. Prentice Oko. Dr. Orim, he said. Like he'd been waiting. I need an emergency board meeting, she said. Tonight. I have evidence of 11 patient deaths connected to fraudulent insurance transfers inside this hospital. Silence. Then, and this was the part that made her stomach drop, he laughed. Soft. Almost gentle. Dr. Orim, he said. Who do you think has been keeping the inventory? The line went dead. Tavita looked at her. Adaeze looked at the box. The car park lights flickered once above them, and went out. The lights came back. 12 seconds of darkness. Long enough for a car to reposition, long enough for a door to open, long enough for everything to change without witnesses. Adaeze scanned the car park. A black SUV that hadn't been there before sat at the far end, engine off, lights off, parked with the nose pointing out. The exit position. The position of someone who wasn't arriving. Who was waiting. Drive, she said. They're blocking. They're not blocking. They're watching. There's a difference. Adaeze kept her eyes on the SUV. If they wanted to stop us, they would have done it in the basement. They want to see where we go. Who we contact. Tavita pulled out slowly. Normally. The exit was on the opposite side from the SUV, and she took it without accelerating, without hesitation, without giving anyone watching a single readable signal. They merged into traffic. The SUV didn't follow. Which was worse. It meant they didn't need to. Adaeze opened the box on her lap and worked by phone light, moving through files with the focused speed of someone who understood that the window she was operating in was closing, and had been closing since the moment Prentice Oko laughed. 11 files. 11 patients. She photographed every page, not with the phone's camera, which backed up to a cloud account registered to her hospital email, which Prentice could access before morning. She used an old device. Offline. A tablet she kept for reading research papers, registered to nothing, connected to nothing. Each photograph was a sealed room. File 7 stopped her. The patient name was Adaeze Vael. She checked it twice. 3 times. The name didn't change. Cassius Vael's younger brother. Admitted to the private cardiac ward 9 years ago. Documented as a natural death. Heart failure, unremarkable, signed off by Fenwick. Insurance payout to the estate. The estate controlled, at the time of Adaeze's death, by the newly married Seraphine Vael. Adaeze sat with that for a long moment. Seraphine hadn't just built the system. She had tested it on family. Tavita. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. Did Cassius know about his brother? Tavita's hands tightened on the wheel. That's what broke him. Finding Adaeze's file. That's when he stopped being careful. When he stopped being careful. Meaning what? Meaning he started making mistakes. Emotional ones. A pause. Meaning he started looking for someone inside the hospital he could trust. She glanced sideways. He'd been watching you for 8 months, Dr. Orim. Before the gala. Before the termination notices. He knew what Seraphine was doing to you, and he let it happen because he needed to know if you'd break. The air left the car. I was a test, Adaeze said. You were a candidate. For what? Tavita didn't answer immediately. She turned onto a street Adaeze didn't recognize and pulled over and cut the engine and sat in the silence for 3 full seconds before she said, He needs you to testify. In front of a federal medical board hearing that has been scheduled, quietly, privately, for 4 days from now. She turned. He's been building toward it for 14 months. The hearing exists. The evidence exists. She nodded at the box. That exists. But Cassius is sedated in a hospital his wife controls, the administrator is compromised, and the only copy of the complete case file, she stopped. Was in that basement, Adaeze said. Was in that basement. Outside, a car moved slowly past without stopping. Adaeze looked at the box. At 11 files. At one photograph of a dead man named Adaeze who had trusted the wrong people inside the right building. She thought about Seraphine's voice in the corridor. He has a habit of trusting the wrong people. She thought about Prentice laughing. She thought about every doctor in that banquet hall who had made a calculation and stayed seated. Then she thought about what she was, what she had always been, in every room where staying seated was the easier answer. She picked up the offline tablet. "I need the name of the federal board's appointed contact," she said. "And I need to get back into that hospital before Fenwick's morning rounds." Tavita stared at her. "Seraphine will. I know what Seraphine will do." Adaeze met her eyes. "I need to get to Cassius before she does it." Tavita started the engine. And somewhere behind them, in a hospital basement that was probably already being emptied, 11 years of carefully kept secrets began their last night of safety. 4:51 a.m. 9 minutes before Fenwick's earliest possible arrival. Adaeze knew his schedule the way she knew every senior physician's schedule. Not from friendship, from survival. Tavita took the front entrance. Adaeze walked in behind a night shift porter, badge forward, pace calibrated to the specific frequency of someone who belonged everywhere and was running late for something important. The night desk nurse looked up and looked away. The elevator opened immediately. 4th floor. The corridor was quiet in the particular way of hospitals before dawn. Not empty, but reduced. One nurse at the station, head down, charting. One orderly at the far end, back turned. Adaeze walked to Cassius's room without slowing. She pushed the door open. He was awake. Barely. His eyes were the eyes of someone fighting medication, the pupils slightly wrong, his focus arriving in waves rather than continuously. But he was awake and he saw her, and something in his face shifted from effort into relief so raw it was almost painful to witness. "I took the box," she said immediately. Quietly. "File 7. I know about Doran." His jaw tightened. The relief inverted into something that looked like grief that had been living behind a locked door for 9 years and had just heard the key turn. "She killed him," he said. The words came out stripped of everything. No performance, no control. Just the sentence. "I couldn't prove it." Fenwick's signature was clean. "I couldn't." He stopped. His left hand was doing the curl again. "I married her 2 years before Doran died. By the time I understood what she was, I was already inside it. You built a case. I built a case." His eyes sharpened slightly. "The hearing is in 4 days. Federal Medical Board. I have a contact. Her name is..." The monitor alarm spiked. "Not cardiac." The 4-line. Adaeze looked at it, at the drip rate, at the secondary bag that hadn't been there on her last visit, at the label that was correct in every visible detail and wrong in one invisible one. The concentration. Off by a margin that would read as equipment variance to anyone not specifically looking. Someone had adjusted his drip. Since midnight. Since Fenwick's last round. She moved to the 4-pole. Fast now, past the point of performing calm, and shut the secondary line off with one hand while reaching for the call button with the other. "Don't," Cassius said. She looked at him. "If you call the nurses, Fenwick gets here in 4 minutes. Seraphine gets here in 7. His voice was steadier than it had any right to be. "I need 4 days. Not 4 minutes. You need a toxicology panel right now." "I need you to take what's in my left drawer," he said, "and walk out of this hospital before the sun comes up." She opened the drawer. A USB drive. A folded paper with a name and a number. And a signed, witnessed, legally notarized medical authorization, naming Dr. Adaeze Orim as the sole authorized physician for Cassius Vael, effective immediately, superseding all previous arrangements. Superseding Fenwick. She stared at it. "You prepared this before the gala," she said. "I told you. I was prepared." She looked at the document. At the USB. At the man in the bed who had let her be targeted for 8 months to test whether she would break and had chosen her anyway, which was either the most calculated thing anyone had ever done to her or the most desperate. She hadn't decided which. "If I walk out with this," she said, "Seraphine moves tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Yes. You'll be alone in here. I've been alone in here for 14 months. His eyes held hers. Go. She took the drawer's contents. Took one last look at the adjusted 4-line. Photographed it with the offline tablet. Timestamp locked. Walked to the door. Dr. Orim. She turned. Cassius Vael looked at her from the hospital bed. Diminished, medicated, stripped of every instrument of power he had ever wielded. And he said the only thing he hadn't said yet. Thank you. She left. The corridor was still quiet. The nurse still charting. The orderly gone. She reached the elevator and pressed the button and stood waiting, and that was when she saw it, reflected in the elevator's metal door, distorted but unmistakable. Seraphine. At the end of the corridor. Standing perfectly still. Watching her leave. The elevator opened. Adaeze stepped in. The doors closed. And she stood in the descending elevator with a USB drive and a legal document and 11 photographs of dead patients, knowing that whatever was about to happen in the next 4 days would either end Seraphine Vael or end her. No middle ground existed anymore. The federal hearing convened at 9 a.m. on a Thursday. Not in a courtroom. In a conference room on the 6th floor of a building 3 blocks from the hospital. Deliberately unremarkable, deliberately unannounced. 8 people around a table. The kind of room where careers ended quietly so the noise wouldn't reach the street. Adaeze was the first to arrive. She placed the box on the table. The USB drive beside it. The notarized authorization. The toxicology report she had commissioned privately. The one that confirmed Cassius's 4 had been laced with a sedative compound at twice the therapeutic ceiling, slow enough to look natural, fast enough to finish quietly. She placed the offline tablet last. 11 photographs. 11 files. 1 photograph of a dead man named Doran. Then she sat down and she waited. Seraphine arrived at 9:04. She walked in and saw the table and stopped. 1 full second of stillness, the first uncontrolled moment Adaeze had ever witnessed from her, and then her composure returned like a mask snapping back into place. She sat down across from Adaeze. Neither of them spoke. Fenwick arrived at 9:06. Saw the box. Sat down heavily without being directed to a seat, like his legs had made a decision his mind hadn't caught up with yet. Prentice Oko didn't arrive. At 9:08 the board chair confirmed that Prentice had been detained that morning. Federal financial investigators, a separate but intersecting case, the irregular transfers finally finding the hands they belonged to. Seraphine's jaw moved once. Then was still. The hearing lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Adaeze testified for 90 of them. She did not perform. Did not dramatize. She presented 11 deaths, 11 transfers, 1 brother, 1 adjusted 4-line, and 14 months of a husband's quiet, devastating case building, delivered in the flat, precise language of someone who understood that facts presented clearly were more destructive than facts presented loudly. Seraphine's legal team objected 14 times. The board overruled 13. On the 14th, Cassius Vael walked in. Not in a wheelchair. Not supported. He walked in under his own power, still pale, still wrong around the edges, with the particular determination of a man who had decided that if this was the moment, he would be standing for it. He sat beside Adaeze. Seraphine looked at him across the table, and for the first time Adaeze had ever seen, something behind her eyes broke. Not remorse. Something older and colder than remorse. The specific grief of someone who had built something enormous and was watching it come down and understanding, finally, that they had built it on a fault line. He didn't look back at her. He looked at the board and he said, "I would like to add my testimony." Seraphine Vael was suspended from all hospital governance pending criminal investigation before noon. Fenwick surrendered his medical license by 2 p.m. By evening, 3 additional names had emerged from Prentice Okoa's financial records. Names Adaeze didn't recognize. Names that would generate their own hearings, their own boxes, their own tables. The inventory was open now. No closing it. Cassius found her in the corridor outside at 4 p.m. The building emptying around them. The particular exhausted quiet of a day that had taken everything from everyone in it. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment. Then, I owe you more than I can calculate. You don't owe me anything, she said. I'm a doctor. It's what I do. You saved my life twice, he said. Once on the floor. Once in that room. She looked at him. At the damage in his face. Not from the cardiac event, from the longer thing. The 14 months. The brother. The marriage that had been a construction built over a grave. What happens now? She asked. The hospital gets a new board, he said. A clean one. Starting with the person who flagged the transfers 6 months ago and didn't stop asking questions. She looked at him steadily. I'm a doctor. Not an administrator. You're both, he said. You just haven't been allowed to be. She looked away. Out the window. At the unremarkable street 3 floors below where people were walking past a building where 11 deaths had just found their names again. Something settled in her chest. Not peace, something more honest than peace. The particular weight of a thing finished, which was different from a thing resolved, because some things didn't resolve. They just stopped being hidden. The pediatric ward, she said. Fully funded, he said immediately. Retroactively. Whatever was cut. She nodded once. They stood in the corridor a moment longer, 2 people on the other side of something enormous, recalibrating what came after. Then Adaeze picked up her bag. And walked toward the rest of it. Some rooms are full of people who have already made their choice before anything happens. Adaeze Orim walked into that room anyway. And 11 people who died quietly in a hospital that bore the wrong name finally had someone to say, out loud, on record, in a room that mattered, that they had existed. That they had mattered. That someone had noticed. If this story held you from the first line to the last, like this video right now. Subscribe because the next story is already going to hit harder than this one. And drop in the comments. What was the moment you knew Seraphine had planned everything? Let's talk about it. I read every single one.